right, it is the first video in a series of 4 on a brand new Inside the Hem sew along. I am so excited to bring you guys this sew along. We have a ton of fun tips and tricks and things to cover over the next 4 weeks. I'll be posting a video related to this sew along every single Thursday in September in honor of National Sewing Month. So I'm so excited that you have decided to join us and that you will be making a pattern along with me. So for this sew along, I chose a beginner friendly knit pattern that will allow you to make a super cute dress that's perfect for the fall, and depending on your fabric and some of the sleeve options, it could even be great for winter, spring, summer. You could really make it for any of the seasons. So we are working with McCall's 8020. Again, this is a Learn to Sew for Fun level 2 pattern, and with my guidance, fear not, you will be able to sew this if you've never even sewn another garment before, I promise. It features a close-fitting bodice. It has an underbust seam that's a little bit hard to see here, but underbust seam with a little bit of gathers, and then an elasticized neckline, a bunch of different sleeve options, and then this really beautiful kind of just like a fit and flare, and then there's also like a bodycon option as well. You can see all the line drawings, all the options for the dress here. Again, we talked about the sleeves, and you can see the 2 different skirt options as well. I'm going to be sewing view A with the flutter sleeve and the wider skirt. This pattern has been drafted for a particular kind of fabric. Some are drafted for wovens, some are drafted for knits, and depending on which of those fabric types they want you to use will ultimately affect the fit of the dress. If a pattern recommends a knit fabric, you don't want to use a woven. It'll be way too tight. And if a pattern recommends a woven fabric, you really don't want to use a knit fabric because it'll just be too loose. It just won't hug your body like a knit fabric is supposed to do. This dress that I'm wearing today is a knit fabric. You can tell it's not tight, but the way that it fits around the body is a lot different out of a knit fabric than it would be out of a woven. So all that to say, you will need to choose a knit fabric because this pattern was designed for knits, and it says really clearly on there, Learn to Sew with Knits. On the back, it has suggested fabrics, and in it says moderate stretch fabrics with 35% stretch, and then gives you a couple of options there. Feel free to choose whatever fabric you want. I've taken the guesswork out of it. If you are uncomfortable with choosing your own fabric, you feel like you just don't know enough about them yet, you don't feel like going on the hunt and playing a guessing game and possibly wasting your money, go get the fabric that I'm going to be using for this sew along. This is something called double brushed polyester. This one came from Joann. They have a ton of different prints and colors. I will have a link to all of them that are available in the description box. You can order online and have it shipped to you. You can pick up in store, or obviously you can go into the store and shop them yourself. Double brush poly is also available at a ton of other online retailers. So if you have a favorite one, check out their inventory and see what they might have. But what makes double brush poly so great is that it is a relatively stable knit fabric. And all that means is that it's not super lightweight. It's not shifty. It's not silky. And so it is going to do what you tell it to do, which makes it easier to work with. It's also relatively lightweight, meaning it still has a lot of drape to it. You can see how all of these folds are being created in the fabric, and that's what's going to make a really beautiful flutter sleeve. It'll make a really pretty ruffle. It'll make a really pretty, you know how that skirt kind of flares out? This type of fabric with this amount of drape will allow those folds to kind of just like lay over your body. They won't stick out and flare out. They'll kind of just follow the contours of your body in like a really beautiful way. All that said though, it is 100% polyester. It is not the most breathable, so I don't typically recommend it during the summer, but it does make really beautiful garments for fall, for winter, for spring, depending on where you live. It's double brushed, meaning both sides of it have this really soft hand. Soft hand is a term that we use in sewing to describe how it feels. So it is very, very soft, very smooth, but still has a little bit of grit to it. Like I said, it's not silky, it's just smooth. And when you go pick yours up, you will feel what I mean by that. So yeah, double brush poly is also really affordable. I guess it's inexpensive to produce, and it comes in so many different prints. I feel like it came on the scene maybe 5 years ago and has been one of the most popular fabrics among home sewists ever since. The wrong side of double brush poly is not printed. So because this isn't, because the print isn't woven into the fabric, it's just printed on, only one side is going to have the pretty print on it, which is something you need to keep in mind, not for this pattern, but in the future for other patterns. If you have something that's going to be open, like a cardigan, you wouldn't want to use something like this. If you have something with a high-low hem where you can see the underside of the lower part of the hem, you're not going to want something like this. But this is great for the pattern that we're using for McCall's 80/20 because, you know, no wrong side of the fabric is showing in any of these examples. No matter which version you're making, the double brush poly will be really, really great. So go check out the options that are available to you, the different prints and colors. Now, you're wondering, how much of this do I need to get? Obviously. Well, if you look on the back of the pattern, there is a chart that has the sizes of the pattern going across the top and the different versions of the garment going down the side, and then a whole bunch of numbers in between. So I will be following this very first row here, and it says 60 inches because fabric comes in different widths. Some woven fabrics come in 45-inch widths. If you're a quilter or bag maker, you're familiar with 45-inch width fabric. Most fashion fabrics, including all knit fabrics, not all, most knit fabrics are going to come in 56, 58, or 60-inch widths. So this chart here is just assuming that you purchased a 60-inch width fabric. If your double brush poly ends up coming in a little bit smaller than that, just buy another quarter of a yard, another half of a yard, and you'll be just fine. So what size do you need to make? Well, on the pattern, there is a size chart that is going to have your bust, your waist, and your hips. So you are going to get a tape measure around, and I've got my little girl here to help. You're going to measure around the fullest part of your bust, which is right here. You're going to measure at the smallest part of your waist. So this is my belly button way down here, and this is where I measure my waist. Your waist is not where your belly button is. It is at the smallest part of you. And if you are to stand up straight and bend over to the side, where your body naturally folds in on itself, that's your natural waist. It's a lot higher than most people realize when they first start sewing. By the same token, your hip is probably a lot lower. So the hip is the widest part of your bum. So it is not going to be like, my hip bones are right here. This is where my hip bones are. This is where my belly button is. Hip bones, belly button. And the widest part of my hip is lower than all of that. It covers the widest part of my bum. So you can see how my bum kind of comes out. So this is going to be the widest part of that. So that's where you need to measure yourself for your pattern. And once you write down those measurements, compare them to the chart and write down the different numbers. I am usually, because I have a smaller bust, smaller waist, and a larger hip pear shape, I'm usually in between a few sizes. So I will just circle them all. And then when we go to make the pattern, I'll show you how to grade in between them. But for right now, I will just circle them all. The largest of the sizes, that's the that's what I'll use to decide how much fabric I need. So my hip puts me in a size 22. So that means size 22 on view A, I'm gonna buy 2¼ yards of fabric. And we will get into sizing in a lot more detail next week. Try not to obsess about it too much. Now let's talk about all the other things that we are gonna need to sew this garment. Unfortunately, it's not just patterns and fabric, but also notions. And notions are all the little tools and accessories that you need in order to complete a sewing project. It can also include like trims and buttons and things like that. For this pattern, we don't have any of those other than a little bit of elastic that goes in the neckline. And it says on here, notions, ABC, that you need some elastic. So 1 1/8 yards of 1/4 inch elastic. You're gonna wanna make sure you buy that. I have some linked in the description box that you can either order online or you can find in your local fabric shop, no problem. So there's that, and then also thread. So this whole video series is sponsored by Coats & Clark. If you've ever sewn anything, you might be familiar with the Coats & Clark brand, at least familiar with the fact that they make stuff for sewing, but you might not know too much about them as a company. They've been around for more than 200 years. They really consider themselves pioneers when it comes to fabric technologies, and they strive to bring excellent products to the sewing community, rethinking what might be the norm and how we can improve, or how they can improve on that. So the first thing that you're going to need is regular old polyester thread. So this is the Coats & Clark Dual Duty all-purpose thread. It is 100% polyester, which matches the 100% polyester in our garment. So when we wash our garment, our thread is not going to shrink. Our thread is going to behave just like our fabric is going to. So I've just chose a matching color. You should only need 1 spool of it. If you have a serger, they also make the Sherlock overlocker thread, which we have here. I am going to be using a serger in mine, but you do not have to at all. And I'm going to talk you through that as we start sewing. I just have a serger and I want to have pretty seams on the inside, so I'm going to go ahead and use mine. But you guys will also get to see kind of how this thread works and how it performs, so that in the event that you do buy a serger one day, you'll have a good idea of how the Coats & Clark Sherlock thread works. And then the real game changer in the thread game for this project is Coats & Clark's product called EloFlex. It looks like this. EloFlex is a stretch thread. That's exactly right. It is like thread with a little bit of elastic in it, and you can barely feel it, but it almost feels like dental floss. You know when you pull dental floss and it kind of stretches out, but it doesn't go back? This actually stretches out and goes back. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's actually really, really cool. So EloFlex is great for knit projects, obviously, because you want to be able to stitch a straight stitch. You still need those seams to be able to stretch out, especially, you know, where the elastic is, especially across the width of your body, not necessarily the length, but in your width. Whenever you move around, you know, different arms will stretch out, your waist will stretch out when you bend over, your bum will stretch out. So it's nice to have your seams be stretchy. Without EloFlex, the way to do that is to use a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. The zigzag stitch goes down a little, over and down, over, down. So it creates like an accordion kind of stitch in your side, or in your seams. And so that's what allows the fabric to stretch. But with EloFlex, you don't have to do the zigzag stitch. The zigzag stitch is a little bit annoying because it takes a really long time. You know, it's 3 stitches instead of just the 1. But with EllaFlex, you can do a regular straight stitch on your sewing machine and all of your seams are still going to stretch and move with you just like you would expect with any kind of stretchy garment. It's really, really cool. So I'm gonna be showing you how to use this next week whenever we get started sewing. With EllaFlex, you need, or actually with any knit garments, you need specific needles. You cannot just use your regular universal needles. They will not perform well on knit fabrics. With knit fabrics, there's 2 options. You can choose between a ballpoint needle, like this, or you can choose between a stretch needle, like this. Both the ballpoint needle and the stretch needle have like sort of a rounded tip, whereas the universal needles and all the other ones that you use have a super, super sharp tip. The sharp tip cuts through the fibers of the fabric, whereas the ballpoint rounded needles, like in the stretch and the jersey needles, kind of slide in between the different fibers rather than cutting them. And that's what makes it ideal for knit fabrics. Now, the difference between a ballpoint needle and a stretch needle is that the stretch needle actually has a very, very small little groove that the fabric kind of nestles itself into. It's like a little channel for the thread to lay in. So when it goes into your fabric, it's kind of guided in exactly where it needs to go. And it doesn't kind of have a mind of its own. So that is what is recommended for EllaFlex. So that is what we are going to be using. If you're using the double brushed poly, you're going to need to get a stretch needle size 80. If you're using something lighter weight, you will get a smaller needle, which is size 70. And if you're using something thicker, then you will need to get a larger needle, which is size 90. But for most of the moderate stretch knits that are recommended for this project, including all the ones that are listed on the pattern back, stretch needle size 80 is what we and you are going to need for that. I have a ton of information in the description box. Here's how you access the description box. It's really easy to get to, and it has a ton of information in there. So I'm gonna have links to all of the products that you are gonna need. I'm gonna have a link to the pattern, to the fabric options, and to the needles and thread, including the EllaFlex that you are going to need. So be sure to check the description box, get your little list together of everything that you are gonna need for this project. If you've never sewn before, you're also gonna need some basic items, just like scissors, pins, possibly a seam ripper, because you know, mistakes will happen, and a seam gauge. But if you've ever sewn anything before, you should have everything you need on hand other than these few items. So I am so excited to get started sewing. Next week, we are going to talk about choosing your size, how to grade between sizes if that is necessary for you, cutting out your fabric, and we're going to sew the bodice. I know it sounds like a lot, but we're going to be able to cover that stuff thoroughly but relatively quickly next week. Go get to shopping, go buy all the things that you need, and I will see you back here next Thursday for part 2 of our sew along.